things that the historians will note it's certainly as a landmark in history of FACETS. So I'm really glad you're here. And we have a nice audience. I'm really glad you came out to see your film. And one thing I want to pose to you first is that I remember reading an interview with Wim Wenders. He said that once you start making the film, it starts to acquire a life of its own. And so, but before I pose that particular question, what was the means by which you found out the opportunity to shoot this film? Like, I know Roger and Gene had championed your masterpiece, Hoop Dreams, back in, when it played the Sundance in 1994. But did you know about the memoir by Roger? Or had you read it, thought this would make a good documentary?
No. So I knew about the memoir. I had not gotten around to reading it yet when I got approached by Steve Zellion's producer, Garrett Bash. And he said, we think that Roger's memoir would make for a great basis for a documentary. And I was very interested because Roger had been very good to me over the years with Hoop Dreams, and I had gotten to know him and Chaz a little bit over the years, but not very well because I really tried to maintain that filmmaker-critic distance even when I would run into them in Chicago.
So you weren't close friends with Roger?
No. In fact, Chaz likes to laugh about the fact that they always thought it was weird that I would come up and say hello and then kind of run away.
Where is he going? Did he offend us?
Well, this is before I read the memoir, and I didn't know that Roger had befriended certain filmmakers who we feature in the film. So once I started reading the memoir, I was like, oh man, I kind of blew that. I could have had a friendship with him. I was trying to be so respectful of
like a reporter, keeping a critical distance.
Yeah. So I read the memoir and fell in love with the story. I said to my wife before I started the memoir, it's like, if I don't like this memoir, I should not make this film. Because Roger's been so good to me, the last thing I should do is be the one to make a film about him if I'm not totally into telling the story. He wouldn't want that, and I wouldn't want that. So I love the memoir, and we made the film.
Yeah, I remember Chaz was imploring him to write this autobiography, and Roger, who had a healthy ego, but was so talented as a writer, and when you read the book by itself, it's actually a revelation, because not only does he chronicle his life in such lyrical terms, and it's no small wonder that you actually used the book almost as a storyboard for the film.
Well, I'm not an idiot. I like to steal from the best. When I read the book, I thought this is a great basis for the film itself, not just as a source material, but as a sort of inspiration for how to tell the story. Because in the memoirs, he kind of jumps around. I mean, he goes back and forth between his present life, since all of his medical travails, into his past, and kind of comes back and forth between those two. And I thought he does it brilliantly, and I just thought it would be great in a film to try and achieve that same kind of structure and as a filmmaker who's done a lot of verite work over the years, I love the idea of following Roger around the present some. And when we started the film, there was no sense that he was going to fall ill and be in the hospital as long as he was.
You shot the film, was it 4 months after you started?
Yeah, he died four months into our filming. But the first day we filmed, he was in the hospital. We had all these plans to do some stuff with him outside the hospital, and then Chaz called me as we were coming up on the first shoot, and she said, I've had to take Roger to the hospital. He's hurt his hip. And so we were like, well, let's film that. And fully expecting that in a matter of weeks he would be out of there, and we would kind of resume with the idea of the film, which was to see just how active and engaged Roger was in the world despite all he had been through. And so, you know, this gets back to what you said about Bender's comment, which is, you know, you start a film often with an idea, hopefully a good idea, about what it could be. But then if it's at all, the best films totally take you in a different direction, because whatever your ideas about what they should be or could be are usually eclipsed by what actually happens if you remain open to it. And while we wanted Roger to get better, and we wanted Roger to see this film, of course, and it was really sad for all of us that he didn't, Roger understood as he was ill and as things deteriorated that this was in fact his story, and that he was incredibly brave about it. You know, when you see the suction to clear his passageways, the first time I saw that was when we went over for a meeting with Roger and Chaz shortly before we started filming, and Chaz, I'm going to put the drink down so I can do justice to Roger's gestures. Chaz was like, "Could you guys step out for a second?" And Roger looked at her and she goes, you know, they had this way of communicating without saying anything because they'd done it for so long. And she goes, "Roger, I just want them to step out." And he went, you know, like this. And so we did. We stepped out, but in their beautiful home, there's lots of glass, and I could see through the glass what was going on with the suction. And I turned to my colleagues and I said, "This is something we need to get," because it was such a regular part of his life, you know, at that point. So sure enough, the very first day of shooting, Chaz happened to be out of town. We went into film, they came in to do suction, and Roger was like, "Film it." And then he sent me that email that's in the film later where he says, "I'm so glad we got something most people don't see, suction." And that getting that email was so heartening to me, because it you know, I think documentary filmmakers in situations like that, you know that the wife, in this case, does not want that. You think Roger does, but the last thing you want to do is exploit his pain and suffering, right? But he was indicating to me from the get-go, like, this is the story, and this is the story that needs to be told. And that kind of courage, you know, he showed in so many more substantial ways, but he showed it in this film, and it made him, you know, a great collaborator in this process.
He actually had like a white beard.
Yeah.
And it was, well, literally like a beard to disguise himself.
Disguise it. But he had no interest in hiding that for this film, and which is why we were given such complete access, because when he wasn't out in public, he didn't wear a black turtleneck. He had a white bandage around his neck, and it was very clear what the situation was. And so, no, I mean, and then when I found out, you know, for a while there, Chaz did, and I think more Chaz than Roger, did not want us to know that the cancer had returned. But then at a certain point, Roger just said, he told me, he just said, "You need to know this." And that's, you know, you see that moment in the film where he emailed me about how this, you know, how important that was. So, no, I mean, Roger understood that, I think, for a documentary to have real value and real credibility, it had to be honest. And I think part of what's so remarkable about him is that most famous people do not feel that way about themselves in the public at all. You know, and Roger, you know, not just in this film, but in so many ways, he demonstrated that over and over, that he wasn't going to hide. He wanted people to see. It was really interesting the way he and Jean dealt with illness differently. And I had tremendous respect for the way Jean dealt with it, which was, it was a very private affair. He didn't want anyone to know. His family kept it a secret.
In fact, Roger thought he was going to be coming back to the show.
Thought he was going to be coming back to show. And when that, you know, when the way Jean dealt with it, which I know Roger respected, even though he felt like he should have known, honestly. But he made the decision at that point, long before he ever had any serious illness, that if it ever befell him, he was going to deal with it differently. And he did. And it's sort of, you know, one of our dark jokes that I've had even with Chaz about this is that if Roger and Gene could have argued about how to deal with illness, they would have done it and had a great show on that, you know.
Well, when you first proposed the idea to them, was that their home? Was either party more in favor of doing the film, trusting your empathy, judgment, and sensitivity?
I think they were very receptive. I think that Chaz had this feeling that, much like when you were saying earlier about him writing the memoir, she had this feeling, even though his health was very stable, that time could be limited for him, and that if there was going to be any kind of documentary portrait of his life, it was better to do it sooner than later. She had that sort of intuition, and her intuition ended up being right. But you know, I think one of the reasons I ended up being a good choice for them to do the film was, in fact, maybe paradoxically, maybe not, that I wasn't close to them. That I knew them, and he knew that I certainly respected the work he had done over the years, and he respected the work I'd done over the years. But we weren't buddies. And I think that, you know, if this film had been made by someone who had been lifelong friends with him, it would be a different film. And I'm not saying this is a better film at all for that. It just would have been different. And I think the fact that I could bring a certain kind of, not necessarily objectivity, but I wouldn't be caught up in my personal feelings so deeply about Roger that it would affect how I told the story. I think that appealed to me.
So were you the only director in the running, or were there other competitors, or did you just get the seal of approval immediately?
I think he might have been interested in this guy. You may have heard of him, Werner Herzog.
That would have been a different film.
It would have been, I stared into Roger's eyes.
This is your life, but my food.
Roger looked at me with profound sadness.
And then the bear came into the room.
I think there was interest in that, but Werner, you know, perhaps because Werner was so close to him, he didn't want to take that. I don't know why, but Werner agreed to be interviewed. It was a funny interview because when we interviewed him, it was in LA, and he launched right into the Soldier of Cinema, you know, thing, which if you have read much of Werner's comments over the years, that's it's something he has said.
It's one of his mantras.
It's one of his mantras, right? In fact, it's such a mantra that Ramin Barani imitates him in the film without knowing that we were actually getting that comment. So he kind of launched into this, you know, the Soldier of Cinema thing, which of course I wanted.
Right.
And then he said, I think we're done. And I was like, oh, no. We're just,
the cave is closed.
we are just getting started. He's a profound inspiration. I mean, before I read the book, I had this impression of Roger. I liked Roger and I loved his writing. But to be honest, you know, I thought he was, when you meet critics, film critics, that you've read over the years, and you meet them for the first time, or I'm just speaking for myself, I won't say you. When I've met them, sometimes I'm kind of struck by, but I don't know why, but I'm kind of struck by the fact that they seem to be people who have kind of spent way too much time in the dark. Watching movies, you know, they are cinephiles, and while I love their writing and that dedication leads to that incredible insight in writing,
right.
As people they don't feel as full to me, and this is totally, you know, it's not like I got to know these other critics well or anything,
right.
But I assume that that's the way Roger probably was, you know, that Yeah, he was funny, but that he was a film critic, and I had certain ideas of what film critics were, rightly or wrongly, mostly wrongly. And then reading his book, I realized this is a man who had this incredible life and was a great film critic. And so the title Life Itself made sense because, you know, the tagline for our poster was the only thing he loved more than films, basically, life itself. And he lived that. He lived that so fully. So I was very inspired in the reading, and then in the filming with him, and getting to know him finally, really getting to know him. That's how he lived his life. And even as he was facing death, that's how he lived his life. He was cracking jokes. He was, you know, making Chaz laugh, even as he was staring down the end. And that wasn't for the camera. That's who he was. And so that was profoundly inspirational for me. And I'm not a young guy anymore. I wasn't a young guy when I made that. You know, as I move into those later years, I often think about the way Roger embraced life and want to do the same.
Yeah, Roger, you know, he was extremely well read to an unbelievable degree.
Yeah.
And he also, like you just said, he was almost he had like an appetite for
Everything.
For everything. That's another Life Itself, you know, sequel. And so, was there any moments where Chaz wanted to see a scene before you could include it to the film, or did she just sort of just say, you know, tacit approval, or just say, well, this is your film, this is Roger's life, so you're the artist?
Right. No, there was never there was never any kind of formal understanding or agreement about like they need to review it, or, you know, once he passed that she needed to review it. There was never that. I don't do that with films, but what I do, and I told Roger this, and it was interesting. It's interesting you asked that question because at one point, very early in the process, before you even started filming, I got an email from Roger where he said, I've explained to Chaz the way this is going to work. This is not going to be like our TV show. This is not going to be like something we make. This is your film. We do not have control over it, and that's the way it is. And I've explained that to Chaz. And so I emailed Roger back and I said, thank you for that. But I also want you to understand that my approach is, as we near the end of this process, is to two things. One is to share what we have made with you before it's done, not to give you editorial control, but because we owe that to you. And I want your feedback. And I said, and that speaks to the other piece of this, which is my sort of philosophy of documentary filmmaking is, and I said, I know this, I don't know if I wrote this, but I know it can sound pat. I just said, I like to think that I'm not making a film on someone, I'm making a film with them. Now that doesn't let me off the hook for honesty and candor and all of that, but I really do think of it as a collaborative undertaking, and my experience has told me that when your subjects feel that, they are actually more open and revealing of who they really are than if they feel like you're making a thing on them, right? So I told him that, and he took me at my word, because that first day in the hospital, he started telling me what to shoot, which was great. But for Chaz, like I said earlier, she didn't want the suction film. But the second time we filmed suction, she was in the room when he's playing the Steely Dan song, and she let it go.
How did she feel when she found out that the first suction had occurred without her?
She was not happy with him. But she has told me, and if she was here tonight, which I know she's out of town, she can't be here, she would be, but she's told me that he was right, that it needed to be there. And I give Chaz tremendous credit on so many scores, but just on this point, that moment near the end of the film where she's helping him back into the house and he is not happy, and he's not happy with her. I was shooting that, and I kind of fully expected at some point for her to turn around and just say, Steve, leave, stop filming. This is hard for us. She didn't. And when it was in the film, she never complained about it.
How did you feel expecting her to have that reaction? You kept shooting.
I kept shooting because that's what you do, but I also kept shooting because I felt like it was important that you see some of the harder aspects of this for a caregiver, and for him too. But I kind of expected that when I showed her the cut, that I might have to defend it, right? That I might have to say, I really think that needs to be in there, that she might say, does that really have to be in there? But she didn't. She did comment on it. She said it was hard to watch that. And she said, but I understand why it's there.
Well, you know what our good friend Werner Herzog would call that, the ecstatic truth.
Exactly. Yes, we were trying to get away from accountant's truth and do a static truth.
Well, were you pleasantly surprised about how well received the film was in terms of critics,
yeah,
as well as the public?
I was. I mean, I felt good about the film, and I was proud of the film that we'd made, but I remember saying to my colleagues before it premiered at Sundance, I was like, well, this is a film that critics may very well hate, because many of them out there knew Roger, and so they're going to be watching this film and deciding to what extent we really captured the man they knew, whereas most critics watch films about people they have no real connection with. So I was a little nervous that they might go after it, but they didn't. They embraced it, and the people that were least happy with the film, and there weren't many that I know of. And if you're unhappy with it, please don't say anything. You can just leave. The thing that made some people unhappy about the film is that they didn't want to see his medical travails in the present so much. And I get that, but I don't apologize for that. I'm glad I'm happy with the decision we made about that. And I think if Roger were here, he would be happy with the decision we made about that. I don't know for sure. But I understand that. I understand that criticism. But it's not one that I look at him now and go, oh God, what did we do? You know what I mean? It's like we knew what we were doing. And that's what we did.
Well, one of the aphorisms that Roger always spoke about, and I do think this is true, where he says, know what a movie's about, it's how it's about what it's about. Mm-hmm. And which means you can watch any movie just as long as you understand what it means intrinsically to itself without bringing your opinion to it, and you assess the aesthetics of it on what the movie actually gives you as opposed to how you think you want to receive it.
Right.
And one of the things about Roger that I thought was really admirable was, as a critic, he actually celebrated filmmakers that he wanted to help, like Errol Morris from Gates of Heaven. Martin Scorsese was depressed because he was in movie jail.
Yes.
And Roger's, the award that Roger accorded him gave him a lot of confidence.
Absolutely.
And did you feel any of that from other critics that you interviewed who actually respected Roger for that position he took on other filmmakers?
Yeah, I mean, I think some filmmakers looked at Roger's relationship to other filmmakers and said he crossed a line. That you're not supposed to have personal relationships with Scorsese and Herzog and Ramin and filmmakers like that. And I think Roger would say, I understand that. I understand that position. But I think Roger, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but Roger, I think it comes through in his memoir, and it came through in the process of making film. Roger loved filmmaking, and he loved to understand filmmaking. And one of the ways to really understand filmmaking, even if you're a film critic, is to get to know filmmakers and understand what they go through in order to make that film. And Roger had, among film critics, I think Roger had a much greater sort of understanding of the process and respect for the process, which was why even when he could trash a film with the best of them. I mean,
he had a book.
He had books. More than one.
More than one.
Of his negative reviews. But the thing is, and again, maybe because I never showed up in one of those books, I'm probably happy to say, but when you read Roger's reviews, even when he had problems with the film, you never felt like Roger was looking down at the filmmaker. You felt a fundamental respect for how hard it is to make a good film. That was a baseline with him. He may disagree with what you made, and he may not like what you made, and there are times when he took real issue with what you made. I like to say that Roger was a moralist, but not a moralizer.
That's a good way of framing it.
You know what I mean? He was a true moralist in the best sense of that word, but not a moralizer at all. And so he had strong opinions, but he had a total respect for what filmmakers went through to make films, and I think that came from the friendship and closeness that he established with filmmakers, and he saw their insecurities, he saw the struggles, he saw what they went through to put themselves out there, and that changed to some degree how he then reviewed them because he knew what was at stake for them.
And also thought he appreciated the mystery about how certain films come into the mind of an artist, and how could you make a film like Gates of Heaven?
Yes.
I mean, and it's like, I have to,
Yeah.
I think it's a film he saw over 50 times.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
You know, so well, let's take questions if anyone has something to present. You, sir?
What was it like for you? Can you recall when Roger first went to bat for Hoop Dreams?
Oh, when he went to bat for Hoop Dreams?
Yeah.
It was, John Iltis, who was a longtime publicist in town and friend of Roger's, and John's still kicking. He was our representative, one of our representatives to try to sell the film Hoop Dreams, and he had this relationship with Roger and Gene, and so he had this brilliant idea. He said, we were going to Sundance. We didn't have distribution or anything. It was a 3-hour documentary about 2 kids nobody had ever heard of, and he said, I know that Gene is a huge basketball fan, and I know that Roger really responds to films about the Black experience. He's even married to a Black woman, and he just says, I think this film could appeal to both those guys, so I'm going to try to get them both to watch it, even though it doesn't have distribution, which they had never done before. But because of their friendship with Iltis, they did it, and they watched it. And then Iltis called me, and at this point the film was at Sundance, or on its way, just about to start its run at Sundance. And he said, they're going to review the film on the show. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, they're going to review the film on the show. I said, well, do you know what they're going to say? He goes, no, but it's got to be positive, because they wouldn't go after a film with no distribution. Why would they do that? They're not cruel people. So I was like, okay, I hope you're right. And so we watched Siskel and Ebert we had a party at my house the night of the show, and we had the key people from the making of the film over, and we watched Siskel and Ebert. And we were kind of stunned. And it was already playing now at Sundance, because they say in the review, like, it's playing at the Sundance Film Festival, you can only see it there. And then we were like, God, why are we still in Chicago? We should be at Sundance. Because back then you didn't go for the whole festival, you went for the first half or the second half, and we were going for the second half. But it was unbelievable, and it was just the beginning. I mean, they came back to it when it didn't get nominated for an Oscar. They made it one of their favorite films of the year. They just kept returning. And when it was actually formally reviewed, when it formally came out, they reviewed it. And there couldn't have been bigger champions than Roger and Gene. And they literally made that film's profile possible, because there's no way a 3-hour documentary shot on video at that time about 2 kids from Chicago who want to play basketball was ever going to be what it became without Roger and Gene's championing of it.
Did you still go to the second half of Sundance that year?
We did.
So was there like a celebratory ski lift?
No, well, it's funny. The very first screening we had was at 10:30 at night, which was like, oh wow, these people are going. It's a 3-hour film. It's 10:30 at night. But certain distributors were coming up because they'd seen the review and they were like, oh, we can't wait to see it, and we're excited. And then these two that were the most animated, the film got underway, and about a half hour into it, I saw them leave. So I was like, guess it wasn't for them.
So, but you weren't taken to like drinks or a big bar for
No. But Sundance was a great experience. We got distribution at Sundance. It was that classic Sundance experience you want to have, without question.
Did you ever have a conversation with Siskel and Ebert after their endorsement at some point? Or you retain your critical distance from them?
No, I never talked to them about the film. There was a dinner at the Toronto Film Festival where it showed right before it opened theatrically. That was organized that Roger was at, but with a bunch of other people. And I thought, oh, this could be my chance to talk to Roger, but I didn't really get to talk to him. I was sitting like 4 seats down, so it didn't happen. But he was always very friendly to me over the years in Chicago, and subsequent films of mine he dutifully reviewed, and he treated me very well, and he was always super friendly to me whenever I saw him, and like I say, I was just always like, okay, hi.
It was
Hey.
hi. It was really nice to see this film again. It really holds up well, and I saw a lot of things I didn't see other times I watched it. But I was wondering, probably because I had seen it before, he saw an awful lot of films. Did you get a sense of whether there were any particular films that influenced his life or his view of life? Or did he keep that distance always?
No. I mean, an early, very influential film for him, I think, was Juliet of the Spirits.
And not Fellini.
Yeah, which I think he wrote about at different points in his life, and he talked about, as he saw it later in life, that it meant different things to him later in life than it meant earlier. And he was making this point that films speak to us. Also, they're these things that they speak to us about who we are when we see them, and that can change over the years, and that was one of the revelations he had in watching that. There were a number of films. Fellini was someone he was very fond of. He was very fond of Bergman, right? Bonnie and Clyde had a big impact. We feature that in the film. He has a book of the great films, and it's a great book to read because it's his reviews of the films that I think meant the most to him.
And he re-reviewed many of those.
Yes, what he wrote in the book was not. He didn't just reprint the review. He wrote all new essays on those films and what they meant to him. It's a great book to get. It's got all these amazing films in it.
So if you can talk in the context of this film or maybe any other film, how do you think your presence influences how things unfold? I don't know if it's Heisenberg or Albert Brooks, but it always bothers me. I always wonder how you approach that.
Yeah, it might be more Albert Brooks. It's the classic question that a lot of people ask, which is, to what degree did the presence of the filmmaker alter the reality that we see on the screen, right? That's another way of asking it. You're asking it in a more subtle and supple way. But and what I tell people is that, first of all, it's impossible to know what it would have been without you to some degree, unless you believe in the whole meta universe thing. I think we could figure that out. But I have no doubt that the making of the film, no matter what level of engagement I take in it, and in this case there was very direct engagement, and I sort of acknowledge that in the film itself, right? You see that I'm interacting with Roger, I'm emailing him, and that becomes part of the storytelling of the film. In other films, my presence is much more less obvious. But in all of them, the film absolutely changes the reality of, there's no way it cannot, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think the key question is not to what degree does the filmmaker's presence change the film, is to what degree did the filmmaker capture something true. And I think we capture something true here. And part of that truth is elucidated, I think, by my relationship to him, not compromised by it. When I did a film called The Interrupters, there are people that speak to me in that film in ways that they would not speak if I weren't there. They're speaking to me because I am an outsider. I'm a white guy in an environment where for me to understand what they are experiencing, they feel a need to tell me what that is. Does it make it less true? No. It just makes it different. It makes it different than if I wasn't there, but they're speaking a truth for them and trying to express it to me, which I greatly appreciate. So, and then I think the other thing is that the making of a film should, in the best of all worlds, the making of a film should have an impact on that person too, not just the filmmaker. We see the impact that making the films have on us. You know, we get this incredible window into people's lives and this incredible experience, and we're moved and illuminated and all this. But in the best situations for me over the years, it's also been a great experience for that person in the film too, that's unique to them, that they've had cause to reflect on their lives in ways that they might not have otherwise, that they've had cause to think about their lives in different ways and to explain their lives in different ways. And I think that's a great thing. I love the fact that subjects ideally come out of the experience enriched by it in a way that it would not have happened had we never shown up. That to me is where we all get something from it.
I have a question how you decided to balance his life versus his life with this illness. Because it feels a little bit about his story of living with the illness versus his life as a film critic. I mean, there's a lot of old, I'm sure there was tons of old film for you to watch.
Yeah, to me it's about both those things. It's about both. It's about who he is in the present and the kind of, because I felt like the way, what he was going through illuminated the man that he was. It illuminated it. It illuminated the man that was the critic. It illuminated the man who embraced life and went to, you know, O'Rourke's nightly, and you know, it helped us to see that man, even though that man is compromised by illness at this point. And his courage in dealing with it was something that I thought was important for people to see. And like I said earlier, some people see that in the film and they think, I think you showed too much of that. And I respect that opinion. I totally respect that opinion. I also had other people come up to me and say, I went through that with my husband, or I went through that with my wife, and that really spoke to me. It was great to see the way Chaz dealt with that, and the way Roger dealt with that. So, you know, no film says the same thing to everybody, and no film appeals. You know, it also, as I was saying earlier about Julia de Spirit, it's like where you are, certain people this film speaks to in ways more significantly about that than about his film criticism, and other people it speaks more to them about his tremendous historic and creative role in film criticism. I want a film to have a lot of things to offer you, and not necessarily everybody gets the same thing.
And once you completed the film, were you apprehensive about what Chaz would think once she saw it? And where did she see it?
Well, she got to see it before it was done. We talked about it. I mean, that's part of our process. It's like before it's done, she saw it, And the first time she watched it, and this is not uncommon. It's not uncommon for people that are in the film to seeing themselves and seeing their stories to focus on things that I wouldn't have thought they would focus on. But it's because it's them and it's their life and it's on the screen. And so a lot of times, I encourage them, I say, look, watch it, then watch it again. I mean, I'm happy to talk to you at any point, but I encourage you to at least watch it twice before we talk, if you will, because the first time you watch it, it's just kind of like this. It's almost hard to watch with any sense of objectivity, or well, it's never objectivity, but you know what I mean, with any sense of distance from it, because it's you up there, and you can get focused on the most unusual things that I don't even think about.
Or maybe even some mundane details.
Maybe some mundane detail, but then when watching it again helps you to kind of get past that enough to sort of see it more for what it, I think, really is. But we had great conversations about it. There were things I don't remember now. There was nothing substantially that we changed as a result of that.
So she didn't have to come around to something.
I think the only thing she had to more or less come around to was that the suction. I mean, she was getting it, but that it really was the right decision. And I think once other people in her circle saw it too, which is fine with me to share that, they encouraged her in that regard. That no, Chaz, this is good. And Chaz today she would tell you, honest. She would tell you that she's glad that that's in the film. And that she did have real concerns about it, but that it was the right decision from her point of view. Now, there may be some of you think, I don't care that she thinks it's the right decision. I don't think it was a good decision. That's fine too.
Just don't tell them.
Just don't tell them.
Did he get to see any type of work in progress?
No, he died before we'd done any real editing to speak of.
So he wanted such
I did share with him when he was really ill. Chaz said, "I'm looking for something to lift his spirits," and so I shared with him a couple of moments from the hospital that were funny. But now I'm trying to remember which ones I shared with him. I'm not even sure they're in the film, but they were just funny moments, just something that would hopefully make him laugh.
Like the one where he says, "I tell the jokes."
Yes. Yeah, I think I did share that actually. Yeah, Steve, leave the jokes to me, basically. And I shared something else that was funny that happened that didn't end up in the film, and I can't remember what it was now, but that's it. I mean, he really didn't, in any real sense, he didn't get to see any of it, which is really unfortunate because, when I was editing and I edited it with a longtime editing partner, David Simpson, I would think about Roger like being in the room looking at what we were doing and thinking, what do you think, Roger?
I think Chaz has expressed those sentiments as well. Like she still feels his presence around her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, Chaz would tell you she talks to him.
Right. Yeah, I totally believe that.
Yeah.
Was there anything in hindsight, now that you see the movie now, that you thought you should have kept in the movie, or anything you thought you should take out, after years of, living with it?
Well, this film came out 8 years ago. If you asked me that question maybe 6 years ago, I probably could give you a good answer. No, it's perfect. No.
Don't change the scene.
No, I just don't. I'm sure there were. I just don't recall now. I don't recall now what it would be. It's funny. I haven't watched it in a long time. Once I make them, because I watch them so much in the process of making them, I tend to move on and just move on to the next thing. Which doesn't mean that it's not dear to me. It is, but I don't like. Maybe because I don't want to look at it and go, "Oh, why did I do that? Why did I put that in there? Why did I?"
Well, actually, when you were given the opportunity to shoot the film. How did you feel about yourself when the opportunity came upon itself? Because some people think, I really want this, but now how am I going to do this? Like, what was that thinking process?
Well, I was really happy that I got the chance to do the film initially, and the process of making the film was wonderful in many ways and sad in other ways. But after he died, I remember thinking very distinctly, this is the only film biography of Roger that will be made that he participated in.
And this is a film that he himself would have wanted to see?
And would wanted to see, yeah, I mean, I hope so. I don't know if I wanted to read the review of it from him. But I felt a greater responsibility once he passed, because I couldn't kind of go, well, if it's not that good, somebody will come along and make a better film. It was like, maybe they will, but they won't have Roger, and I had Roger, so I felt a greater sense of responsibility. I mean, I feel a great responsibility no matter what this thing, but it just sort of made it even greater that this was the one that he was a participant in, and so let's do everything we can to get it right. So.
Well, I can only say that we should thank him for being here. And we should go to the studio for refreshments in case anybody wants to stick around and have another Socratic informed discourse. So bring your notebooks.